Hi, this is Ibarionex from the Candid Frame. Today I want to talk about how shadow can help lead the viewer's eye to exactly that part of the image where you want them to look. We've talked about the importance of shadows before, like looking for shadows in order to find what the quality of the light is, or using shadow to create or accentuate contrast. Here I'm going to talk about how shadow can help you to control where the subject looks in your frame first. Here we have a shot by Hannelore and Rolf Becker. We don't have any XF data here. So where do you look first when you take a look at this picture? If you're me, you immediately gravitate to the woman in the upper right-hand corner. Why? Because she's the brightest element in the frame, and also she's the point of greatest contrast. The high contrast light in this particular scene, which I think is some light passing through the window, creates this very graphic and high contrast element in the upper right hand corner. And your eye immediately gravitates to her because the light is falling on her face. And again, we're also naturally drawn to the human face almost automatically. Anytime we see a face, our eyes immediately go there. But it's those qualities of light and shadow that help guide the eye there. And as a counterpoint, we have the rail here, what appears to be at the top of a stairwell. So when you use shadow in this particular way, what you're doing is that you are de-emphasizing other elements that are in the frame, which potentially could be distractions like, text or other people. Sometimes you will expose for a scene by exposing for the highlights and letting the shadows go black. That's called crushing your blacks. Or you can accentuate it a little in Photoshop or Lightroom by moving your level slider so that your shadows become darker and darker and darker, and any detail there is completely obscured. I don't know which of the two Hannelore here used to achieve this look, but in either case, it really works for me. So using shadow is not just about obscuring detail. I do that a lot when there are distractive elements that I want to get rid of. But what I'm talking about today is using shadow in relation to what's happening with the highlights so that the viewer looks exactly in the area of the frame that I think is most important, in which case it's the woman and it's the rail. Being conscious of the potential of a high contrast scene to do that can really help you to build your compositions. I talk a lot about making your photographs rather than taking them. And one of the things that's really essential, whether you're shooting color or black and white, is to be aware of the potential for light and shadow to emphasize and de-emphasize certain areas of your frame. And when you face a situation like this, almost automatically for me, I always consider crushing my blacks and just emphasizing those elements that I want to bring attention to. And then at that point, it's about creating balance. Because if the rail wasn't there, it still might be an interesting shot, but the rest of the frame would just be dominated by black. And that might be a really sort of cool shot in which this woman would be floating in inky blackness. But I kind of like the presence of the rail there to serve as a counterpoint, especially because the diagonal line created by the rail mimics the diagonal line of the light, of that shaft of light on the wall right behind the woman, and also in the signage right above the woman's head and to the left. There's a repetition of that diagonal line that exists throughout the frame. So think of shadow as a way of framing those areas that you want to bring emphasis to. Here we have a shot by Robert Cruz, no XF data on this shot here. And here, the shadows are also framing the subject, in this case, the dog. We have some dark tones here. I'm not sure exactly what this is, whether it's some sort of display. I see some text in the right-hand corner. But there's also some shadow, as you can see, on the floor. And that shape around the dog is created by both the shadows and what seems to be some black construction of some sort that exists there. And here the shadows are framing the context in terms of how we experience the dog in the frame. Now, our eyes immediately go to the dog for a variety of different reasons. One, the dog is the brightest element in the frame. He's also the greatest point of contrast because of his white and his black fur against the red, and the contrast of his white fur against the surrounding black shadows. All of those things help to guide the viewer's eye straight to the dog, and as he's resting there in the sunlight. But the shadows also do some very other interesting things besides just framing our experience of the dog. It also creates some very graphic shapes that pervade the entire shot, because the shadows sort of bleed into what seems to be part of the construction or some of the objects that also exist in the frame that are relatively dark. So sometimes you really can't tell where the objects are and where the shadows begin or end. And it works really nicely here because we get this very graphic shot. You can see by the strong presence of the shadow here that the areas that are red, that are green, become all the more dominant. And then because you've sort of limited the area where there's any detail, where there's any information, the relationship between the red and the green becomes that much more important. The shapes, the colors, even that small piece of wood that is just to the left of the dog's head, which if a scene was completely evenly illuminated wouldn't be a very significant element in the shot. But because so much is obscured, that little block of wood and its sort of goldish color becomes that much more important. There's much more weight assigned to it just because there's so much shadow. Here, you can just barely see it. You have a little bit of red there. That little bit of red for me, really works just because it complements what's happening here. It probably is the same floor, but we have that here. We have that here. I think we may have a little kiss of it here. But you can see by having all this area, and there's some down here as well, you can see how these small areas that are surrounded by shadow all of a sudden have more weight. There's more significance to them because of the presence of the shadow. So it's not just about sort of the big use of the shadow here to sort of frame the dog. It's also about accentuating relationships between different elements in the frame. The green and the red is probably the biggest example here. If you had a lot of other detail here, other colors, all of a sudden that relationship between the red and the green would probably be a lot less significant than it is now. And so when I think about shadows and about the way that they de-emphasize things, I start looking at the things that I think are going to be accentuated because of the presence of that shadow. And I start thinking about creating compositions where I can really build on the relationships of those things. So the red and the green, the various graphic shapes of the things that sort of exist throughout the frame, those little kisses of red color that exist in the upper right-hand corner, lower right-hand corner, and the upper left-hand corner of the frame. I start thinking of those little details, trying to figure out, do I include them or do I exclude them from the frame? Do they serve the overall shot or do they diminish it in some way? By having the shadows and by eliminating a lot of shadow detail, I'm sort of parsing things down and then choosing which elements am I going to keep in order to make the shot as effective as possible. Okay, here we have a shot by Benoit Alluin. This was shot with an Olympus EM5 Mark II at 1,000th of a second, f8, ISO 320. So here the shadows aren't necessarily framing, but they are guiding the eye to this woman who's walking across this building. And we get this great graphic shape from the shadow. Typically when we see a high contrast shadow against a wall, usually it's a very straight vertical shadow. So you get a shadow that obscures the area to the right and then all this highlight area to the left. Here, this unusual shape is really a wonderful graphic in and of itself. And this line here and this line here help to guide the eye to the placement of this woman here who's walking and who provides this wonderful gesture of her right hand coming up to the side of her head. Really love that little touch there. So here you have the shadow that is obscuring, the cobblestone street portion of the wall, and our eye is again guided to the brightest area of the frame, which is this area here around this wall and around the woman, and it accentuates the contrast between the green shutters and the wall itself. And so imagine this shot if it were just evenly illuminated by just the wall. We would have probably sort of an interesting shot, but a kind of shot that you probably have seen 1,000 times on Flickr and Instagram, where you have a colorful wall and someone walking past it. This shot brings it up a level because the shadows and creates this wonderful graphic pattern on the wall. And it also helps to guide the eye to where the photographer wants people to look. That's what I'm talking about using shadow to guide the viewer's eye. In the previous 2 frames, the shadows help to frame the subject, and here it's guiding the eye to the subject. It's thinking about shadows in a more creative way, trying to think of shadows as a tool just as you would any other sort of graphic or color element in the shot to guide the viewer's experience of a photograph. It's not just about contrast, right? Because these images do more than just create a high contrast shot because of the quality of the light. It's about using the shapes that the shadows create to help create an experience in a photograph. That's a lot more fun and a lot more interesting. This really demands that you pay attention to shadows, probably to a greater degree than you're used to. But I think that the more you practice this kind of seeing, the more interesting you'll be able to make your photographs. I hope that was helpful to you guys. That was really fun for me because I had really not thought about using shadows in that way until I saw those images and I realized, wow, that's a really interesting and creative way of seeing the next time I go out. And I hope you take it to heart and see the kinds of images that you can create as a result. The Candid Frame is not just a YouTube channel. It is a podcast I've been doing for the last 10 and a half years, which features conversations with photographers of every genre, not just street photography. And you can visit thecandidframe.com to see the whole host of interviews that we have. But I really recommend scrolling down to the page here, and you'll find right below our donation button, which I always welcome contributions. Here we have links to the Android, iOS, and the Windows operating systems for various phones, and you can download the Candid Frame app, which will give you access to every interview that we've done over the last 10 and a half years. And you can listen to them at your convenience. You can save them to your phone if you really love an interview. If you can listen to it or pause it and then later on listen to it. And you can even share it or send me feedback on episodes. It's a great way. I know that there's iTunes and they have the iTunes app, but this thing is totally dedicated to my show. And it really makes it easy to do searches. So if you want to do a search on street photography or landscape photography, you can type in a search and you'll find all the interviews with that have that tag, and make it really easy to search through the hundreds and hundreds of interviews that we have there. So check it out and enjoy. And if you want to contribute to the Candid Frame Flickr community, all you have to do is go to the Candid Frame on your computer and ask to be added. Don't try to add using your phone or your tablet. It keeps telling you that it's a private group and that you can't be added. That's not the case. You need to go to your computer in order to be able to join. And once you do that, I'll be glad to add you. I do about once a week. So if I don't get to it immediately, just be patient and you'll be part of the group. So thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you next time.